All right, hey everybody, it's Greg LeBuff here with you with Coach Dustin, Coach Brad. It's Thursday night. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. And listen, I know that most people have heard my story of my assault 27, 28 years ago. But tonight I want to tell you something that's critically important about it. And this incident and the training that I had prior to my violent assault, I wasn't weaponizing. I was, as you guys know, I was involved in traditional martial arts as a kid and into my adulthood, early adulthood, and then I switched into boxing, kickboxing, and was a sparring partner for a couple of professional fighters, and that was all prior to my violent assault. But after the violent assault, I stopped thinking about violence, and tonight I'm going to tell you why.
Many people understand that they can at any time become the target of a violent criminal assault. These same people know that they have a life, family, and property worth defending. Criminals understand that violence is its own language. Violence is not the sport of competition. Violence is not the art of fighting. Violence is about one thing: destruction. There are those who believe that violence, even in self-defense, is morally wrong. Then there are good people like you who know that defending yourself, family, and others, as well as your property, is not only a personal right, but a duty within a civilized society. Understand, violent assaults are won before they occur. People who learn strategy survive. People who do not will not. For those brave people who believe life is precious and worth defending.
Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Okay, all right, just before we cut to our intro, I said that, as most people have heard, right, I was violently assaulted, and prior to my assault, I had done traditional martial arts as a kid all the way up into my early teens, and then I'd switched to kickboxing, boxing, and I felt it was more combative and more realistic. It was the only stuff that I could find. But the point of what I'm getting at is this: when my violent assault happened, right? Remember, I was targeted by what started as three, predatory individuals, and I was bottled, beaten, stomped, beaten unrecognizable. It mutated, it turned into 8 people. The whole thing, right? It was basically an attempted murder type situation. But I was lucky enough to survive. Now, here's what I said. My statement was this: when that happened, after that incident, I stopped and I found the weaponizing process, and I began my journey into the weaponizing process. One of the earliest things that happened to me was I stopped thinking about violence. Okay, and I'm going to encourage people that are also share the goal of wanting to weaponize, to learn to rise in the face of violence and be themselves as well as their family's protector. I want to encourage you to stop thinking about violence. Now, what do I mean about this? What do I mean when I say this? I want to just real quickly share my story from a slightly different angle. One of the things that I've actually never really talked about before, but one of the things that I vividly remember that was actually happening internally during my assault was a constant thought process. And the thought process, if I can kind of describe this for you, involved a constant thinking about problem solution. Meaning that I had training, right? I had done martial arts since I was a kid. I had competed in the full contact karate tournaments and all that kind of stuff. Then I'd switched over to kickboxing, boxing, sparring partner for 2 professional athletes. So I mean, you're in there doing it. You're kicking, you're punching, you're bobbing, weaving, you're slipping, you're using certain strategies and tactics within the confines of that sport. You're practicing and training combinations. You're working the focus mitts. You're working the heavy bag. You're building conditioning to implement those. It's the whole training process that almost everybody understands. And yet, in a violent assault, the whole dynamic is flipped upside down, right? Remember, violence happens in what we call the gap. Martial arts, combat sport, fighting, it all happens within a known boundary, right? We call it like the world of ordinary affairs, basically, right? Meaning that, you get in a ring and you spar, or a lot of times if a fight breaks out outside a bar or something like that, the guy squares off, names are being said, insults are being hurled, and you guys square off and punches are thrown and maybe some kicks, or you clinch up, you go to the ground. The whole idea though is that within the context of a fight or martial arts or combative sports, there's actually room for thinking to a degree. And during my assault, when you get ambushed, when you're blindsided, when two guys are pinning you down, the third guy grabs a bottle, smashes you in the face, and then changes, and people are the chaos and the ruthlessness that ensues. It's not a fight. It's not a competition. But everything that was happening in that, I remember trying to identify, thinking, okay, here's this guy, right? Get the hands up. Like, oh, look, his hands are down. Stick him with the fast jab. Oh, look, this guy's hands are up and he's rushing towards you. Step off and hit him with the hook punch. You get on the ground and you're thinking, okay, I could punch this guy, do this to this guy, I could do this. I was constantly thinking about my combinations, thinking about the tactics and the strategies of how I can win, right? The same thought process that would exist when you're sparring somebody. You might watch tape on somebody. You're watching what he's trying to do, how he's trying to establish his jab, or the rhythms that he's throwing things in. And so during the assault, I remember clearly, constantly my brain thinking, what's my solution? What am I going to do here? But my brain was so slow because the context of the situation that I was in had no basis of familiarity. It was so completely different. And so hopefully everyone understands that part of it. And then I want to fast forward, because when then I found the weaponizing process, and my instructors who were teaching the U.S. Navy SEALs at the time, SEAL Team 6 out of Virginia, my first exposure to their training, my first private with them, I remember he just sat down and he was talking. He was describing violence, not fighting, not competition, right? Not antisocial aggression. He was describing asocial violence, where you're devoid of choice, facing predatory criminals, where it is reasonable for you to assume that you're facing grievous bodily harm or death. And even in the description of how he was, like how, the whole picture that he was painting, when he started talking about solutions to that, or how you would resolve that, how you would, survive and thrive in those types of situations, I remember having this feeling like there was something visceral at play. And it was so different than the chess type thought process of like learning to fight. And hopefully this is making sense so far. And then when I actually started training it, he did something very, very powerful. And it took me a bit to recognize this, but I want to share it with you, because I think this is so valuable for anybody that really wants to learn to defend against violence. He said that the number one enemy that I was facing right now was my thought process, my brain. He said, what we're going to do is we need to literally in the beginning bypass your brain. We need to train you in such a way that you do not think at all. And a lot of people would automatically jump and say, oh yes, you're talking about training so much and getting to the level where you have this autopilot and you don't have to think, you just do and you react. Okay, great, all that stuff. But there has to be, he was talking about a process for how you do that from day one. And if you think about that, and if you really understand training, you think, well, no, listen, to get to this expert level or this autopilot level where the skills, the strategies, the tactics, the tools are second nature, like someone says throw out a jab, you don't even have to think, bam, you just snap out this fast jab, you got great form, great structure, all that type of stuff. That takes thousands and thousands of hours of training. So you say, well, you're not going to get visceral, you're not going to get autopiloted for years. But that is not, in fact, true. So he was saying that what I'm going to do is I'm going to bypass your brain because I don't trust your brain. If you leave here, if you're with me here, let's say, I think the first time I was down there, I had, 20 or 30 hours with him, some of that. He's like, if you leave here after this and you find yourself in another violent assault situation, your brain will get you killed. So if while you're with me, if I teach to your brain will get in the fucking way. And I just remember thinking, like, I get intellectually what you're saying, but I don't have a fucking clue how you're going to accomplish this. So here's what he did. He would take a strategy, that we use out of weaponizing, out of our playbook, right? And what he would do is he would explain it to me. He would say, but he wasn't explaining it where he wanted me to really understand it. He was explaining it only so much that it gave me just a reference point of understanding, a very loose reference point of understanding. And then what he did is he created a stimulus. And this is the part that I know you guys can now jump in on this conversation, but he created a stimulus. And now I'm going to let you guys fill in a little bit of the blanks here because you understand, because this is how we train people. This is how it worked for me. This is how I did it for you guys. This is how you guys now help me do it for other people. And this is how we've been doing it. From day one, we bypass people's brains. And I'm just going to add one last thing that he famously said to me all the time. This, what we're showing you, weaponizing, is a process that your body learns and functionalizes long before your brain catches up and understands, right? And so when I say to you guys that he created a stimulus for me, what am I talking about? And what's the dynamic here? There's a stimulus, and then from the stimulus we achieve what? So maybe jump in and just viscerally fill in a little bit of how this has resonated with you guys so far.
Yeah, it's like when you create a stimulus, you want to elicit a particular response, right? Now, not just any response, obviously, because that wouldn't really make sense, because you're really controlling the stimulus, right? And by that energy, and by putting that energy onto somebody, that demands a certain type of response, right? Let's use just even pressure. The stimulus of putting pressure on somebody is going to make a response of, you have to move your feet. We're not telling you how to move your feet. We're not telling you, cross step or shuffle step or push step. It's like, no, you could stand there, but the pressure is going to bulldoze you. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, when you truly accept the stimulus and you accept what is in front of you, the thing that makes the absolute most sense when you're faced with that is the response that you wanted to create from facing that energy, right?
Perfect, 100%. Dustin, you want to add anything to that?
Actually, I had an example of exactly what Brad just talked about. You referenced your kind of very first time training in this, and I'll do the exact same thing. The very, very first time I showed up to train in this, at the time we were training in basically a basement of a church, essentially. And so show up and like no real idea what to expect. Seeing the demo and stuff, but wasn't totally sure. And I don't know how, like, we did a quick warm up and then you were like, okay, everybody outside. And I was like, what? Like, we're leaving the confines of like the training space, the formal space. This is weird. And so we go outside, and then you and a bunch of the advanced guys all picked up like chairs, sticks, machetes. They didn't tell us anything. You guys literally just started essentially chasing us around, swinging shit at us. And you just moved, like Brad was talking about. There's pressure, you move. And you very quickly figured out how to just be athletic. How do you move your feet? How the hell do you get away from this stimulus? And the response was just move. That's all you have to do is move. Now, of course, that can be refined and stuff over time, but yeah, that was my very first experience, was stimulus response from day one, and that was 20-something years ago, right? So we're still doing it today.
100%. Those were great definitions and great examples of exactly what I'm talking about. And just to put a sharper point on it, think about it this way. When I knew nothing, I was the victim of a violent assault. So not only did I know nothing, clearly I knew nothing about violence and how to survive violence or how to defend against violence. All of the training and experience that I had was non-transferable. But when I showed up there, you got to think, when you go to somebody who understands the problem, meaning what? They have faced the problem and they have overcome it. And the problem was violence. And the guys that I went to they have experienced violence. And not only have they experienced violence personally, but then on top of that, they had decades of experience working with and training individuals who experience some of the highest levels of violence all across the world. That's why they got the contract to teach the SEAL teams and the FBI and the CIA and the DEA and tons of law enforcement organizations, as well as civilian these guys are like Tony Robbins in the sense that like they'd have to be idiots. For decades, they have had the finger on the pulse of violence. They've been in it. They work with people that are constantly in it, the front lines of it, and they have seen what works and what fails. And obviously, as we all know, the biggest learning curve has come from the failures. And that means the failures in strategy, the failures in tactics, the failures in techniques. That's what we call what the training methodology and the tools and the strategies that we use have been blood tested, meaning people have died proving both the effectiveness as well as the ineffectiveness of what we are doing. And when you're proven ineffective, you have to switch. There is no choice to have blind loyalty to art or to an instructor or to a training methodology or to you know what I mean? It does not exist. And so one of the things, the part we're touching on tonight, is the training method had to be dynamic, alive, and constantly evolving. And they recognize very quick that when you are going to train people who are going to have to operate in situations, high stress situations, where they have the potential to literally be scared out of their fucking minds, you do not tell them what to do. You do not teach them what to do. You condition them. And that conditioning, that stimulus response conditioning is called operant conditioning. There's classical conditioning, is operant conditioning, and both were used on us. And so the operant conditioning, imagine, again, to come back to Dustin's analogy and what Brad was describing, on my first day, like your first day, my instructors understood what violence, what's going to happen in violence. What's the blueprint? What are these guys going to do? And so all they did was go, listen, you know what happens? These motherfuckers will blitz you. And now think about it. Imagine having an NFL linebacker. You're standing 2 to 3 feet away from an NFL linebacker. You're standing there just trying to live your fucking life, and somebody snaps the ball, and that motherfucker blitzes you. Full out. Game mode. You know what I mean? And cranks you. That's fucking pressure. But that's not violence. Violence isn't one. Violence is 3 or 4 of those NFL linebackers surrounding you and all blitzing you at the same fucking time. You know, one hits you low this way, one hits you high that way, trying to rip you in fucking half. Then put knives and bats and guns in their hands. Now we're starting to paint a picture.
And it doesn't stop just because you hit the ground either.
And it doesn't stop because you hit the ground. There's no ref blowing the whistle, right? And so now, if they understand that, like they did, now they're going to say, listen, let's teach this guy about pressure. That's the stimulus, the blitz. That's the stimulus. And very few people train the blitz. They don't, and the people that I've seen that are trying to represent the blitz, it's very like, the guy comes in. It's not an uncontrolled blitz, like, you know, it's not a rampaging bull. It's a more controlled, measured, here I come, one at a time, you know, or 2 people, tentative, you know, it's not a fucking blitz, not a real blitz.
Missing the key part of it though is the pressure. There's no actual pressure there.
Yes.
You know.
And I'll throw a word in with that: pressure plus intent.
Yeah.
When somebody is 100% invested in murdering you, right? That's a pressure. Now listen, in training, you know, it's like anything else. You want to learn to swim, they don't push you in the fucking deep end and just go, well, let's see what he does here, right? And some people might go, well, is that what you're talking about doing? So the first thing these guys did was just blitz you. The first thing that this guy did in your class was chase you with fucking like live machetes and chairs and sticks and all kinds of crazy shit, and you just had to fucking survive? No. What they did, though, was not try to talk to my brain and teach me a technique like Brad was saying about here's how you move your feet and here's the range you need to be at. They simply, and Paul did this with me, picked up a live machete, grabbed a piece of paper, slashed the piece of paper to show me the machete was live, it was real, it was razor sharp, and said, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to be a heat-seeking missile. I'm going to come towards you unrelenting. I will not stop. I will extend I will extend the machete out every time in an attempt to make contact with your body. I'm only going to do it at 5%, but I will be a heat-seeking missile. I will not pull back on that machete. I will extend through, and the whole mission that you have in front of you right now is don't ever let this machete touch your body, because if it does, you will get cut. Do you understand? And then you'd be like, I guess, go. And all of a sudden, there's this forward pressure, 5%, but with extension, with intent. And it's funny because, well, at 5%, but with intent, meaning he actually, in his mind, wanted desperately to make contact with my body, but he controlled the threshold of his speed. Because what did this allow me to do? And trust me, at 5%, when he did that, my brain was like, fuck, this thing, even slow, I don't want to get cut. And you fumble backwards, and I almost lost balance, and I almost fell over. And then I started moving around. And at first, I was trying to stay on his driveway. And he's going, and he realized I was running out of space quick. And he's like, there's grass, there's a car, there's trees. And I was like, oh. It was like permission. I was running behind a car, around a tree. Did it look tactical? Was I, fuck no. It looked like a guy running away from some guy moving 5%, you know what I mean, with a machete. I don't know, what people must have thought. But what I want people to understand is that he bypassed my brain. He said, listen, this is a stimulus. But this stimulus exists in a violent assault. And I know because that happened to me. I got caught in the blitz. That's a power predator. Overwhelm, overpower, outnumber, outposition, and out-equip you. They blitz. They use those 5 elements to blitz you. And so what he did was he was, and I'd never experienced this, he was able to represent and capture a stimulus that existed only, as far as I'd ever experienced, in a brutal, violent assault where people are trying to murder you. And I mean, my SNS was going, my physiology was going, because I'd like, holy fuck, even though this is only 5% right now, this was like, I experienced this. This is what it was fucking like, man. It was terrifying. And so he did it, and he did it for, let's say, 60 seconds, and then he'd stop. And I was breathing heavy. I was like, I had lactic acid in my body. And then what he coached was just breathe, regulate, breathe, control. Now, and then he would start to just refine. When you went around that tree, you turned your back, you did this, you did that. And then he'd be like, okay, you ready? Those are some things to avoid, ready, and go. And he would just, the stimulus would start again. And my response was ugly. But something that I came to understand, I didn't understand this right away, because again, you got to bypass the brain. He was not worried about me understanding in that moment. He was worried about getting me combat ready as quick as possible. The same things he was doing with the SEAL teams at the time. He wasn't worried about explaining to them, and they were smart enough warriors that they didn't need an explanation. They trusted, said, you've been here, you've done this, you've solved this problem, now show me how to fucking solve it. I'm not here to question you, they train me. And so what happened, what I came to understand after, is that it didn't matter that my response was ugly, or inefficient, or uneconomical, or non-tactical for the most part. What mattered, what he saw right off the bat, was when this stimulus of individuals, 1 or 2, because again, it went from him, and then he had 2 or 3 other instructors, and they joined in. And right from day one, when the first 45 minutes I was doing mass attack, I had 3 guys with machetes in each hand at 5%. And when you got 3 guys, them each moving at 5% isn't 5% anymore. That's 15%. And if they're moving at 5%, you're moving at 20 or 30%. If they're moving at 15 to 20%, you're moving at 60 to 70% to stay out of that kill zone. But what happened was, right off the bat, he was conditioning me when that pressure, when I felt that forward blitzing pressure, I was already, the response was move. People have heard this strategy, right? Manage the distance, manage the damage, control the range, control the fight. But how do you practice that in a non-intellectual way from day one? People go, no, we got to wait till we got to teach you footwork and you got to learn all these different footwork techniques and all this stuff. That shit activates your brain. Because in the middle of moving around, you start thinking about, did I do a shuffle step or a push step? Did I do a forward burst or, what type of footwork? Did I drag step? Did I drop, do I skip step? What am I doing here? I'm confused by my feet. And now you're in your brain, you're thinking, and you're dead. And for Dustin, was it the same for you? And Brad, you went through the same thing, but that feeling, right, when you finished the round, you didn't think you were fucking killer. But what you did was go, out of 3 or 4 or 5 of us that were there, you go, I wasn't the fucker that got hit. I didn't get cut. So you right away, what'd you learn? Well, I survived.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm thriving, but I survived.
Yeah, you get a positive result, right? Stimulus, response, positive reward. What was the reward? I didn't get cut. I didn't get smashed. I didn't get hit. I didn't fall and trip over something. That's your positive reward. So what are you going to do next time when you see the exact same stimulus? I'm going to do the same response I did last time.
Yes.
Plus, add in a little bit of refinement, like you talked about. Add a little bit of coaching, and all of a sudden that response gets cleaner and gets better. But as you were talking the thing, I thought it was like, well, I'd rather do the right thing kind of wrong than do the wrong thing kind of right.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what you're talking about. It's like, do the right response, and it can be tweaked and honed and perfected over the years if you have that kind of time before you end up in a situation. But if not, I'd rather at least do the right thing.
Yes. What's the saying there? A poor plan executed quickly is better than a perfect plan executed too late. Yeah. And it's that kind of thing of like right from day one, they fed this stimulus. And this is the process. This is how they helped. Fed me a stimulus and demanded a response. Now, I have seen guys over the years, when I go to start this, and you can tell when people come in, I'll use a stick instead of a live machete. And I start with a stick. And you go to the stick and you start and they don't move. They move back tentatively. They move back like they're base, like, oh, you get close to me and I'm going to pop you and light you up. And you're like, oh, I see. The stimulus that I'm sending you, you believe your response is go, I'm gonna destroy the stimulus. I'm gonna stand tall, I'm big, I'm strong, I'm gonna engage it. No problem. Then you grab the live machete. And all of a sudden you got a 6'5" guy who's 380 pounds who's going, I ain't fucking scared of shit. And you put a live machete in your hand, and that guy goes, wait a fucking minute, you wouldn't actually hit me, would you? And I said, well, that's where you're wrong. I'm absolutely going to swing this machete through. You're either going to be there or you're not going to be there. And all of a sudden they're like, what the fuck? And guess what happens? Instantaneously, with no thought process, they move. And why is that important? Because I don't care how big you are, there's always somebody bigger. I don't care how strong you are, there's always somebody stronger. You don't know anyone stronger than you? You don't know anyone bigger than you? You don't know anyone faster than you? Okay, well then take 3 guys that aren't quite as big, aren't quite as strong, aren't quite as fast, and give them machetes. The point is that all of us very quickly and very easily can find ourselves outgunned and outmanned. Well, that is violence. If you train any other way, if you equate what you do in training to only one person, even if it's say, well, no, we do mass attack, but 90% of the time we do one-on-one, you're way off base. You have to equate everything you do to multiple opponents prepared to blitz right from day one. That's how I started.
Well, and you talked earlier about people, when we talked about pressure, and you said, some people claim they're trying to teach pressure and deal with pressure, but there's actually no pressure and no intent. And it's the same thing with mass attack. A very common mistake you see is people go, oh yeah, we're going to do a mass attack drill. So 4 guys get around you, and then they proceed to take turns attacking you. Yes. It's like, no, that's just one-on-one 4 times.
Yes.
That's not mass attack, right? Yes. So anyway, because you see that a lot.
Yeah, sure. That's arithmetic.
Yeah.
That's multiplying 4 times. That's different. And yeah, you do see that. And then as we get this stimulus, and we're just zeroing in because it was just top of mind. We're just zeroing in on pressure because Brad mentioned pressure. So pressure is one stimulus that exists within the context of violent assaults. Now, for every stimulus, right? And you think, well, there could be millions of stimulus. That's actually not true. there is only a limited amount of stimulus that occurs within a violent situation, and then those few stimulus can appear in various combinations, right? But the blitz and that pressure of the blitz is one. It's one of the main ones. Okay, now with every single stimulus, there is a visceral response that is the most brutally efficient thing that you can do in the moment. It's like, this is what you need to do to survive. I don't give a fuck what Hollywood tells you. I don't care how many fancy techniques and combinations that exist out there. If you're outgunned and outmanned by bigger, stronger opponents who have 100% intent and are invested in murdering you, the pressure's going to be so much, right? And the stimulus is so, you know what I mean? It becomes so clear and so clearly defined that this is what gets people. And all you got to do, again, study criminality. Study the anatomy of injury. This is what violent criminals do, and this is how they take people out of commission. It's key stimulus. So with that, the response is pretty straightforward, and it's pretty simple. But what isn't simple is having the right training methodology that gives you the right response so that you don't have to think. So the stimulus response pressure, and all of a sudden it's stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response, and then tune up, tune up, tune up, tune up, become more efficient. We always say there's no right and wrong, there's just less efficient and more efficient. The only time that we ever consider anything wrong is when you do nothing. You get a mental stall, you stop. That's it. You can have a stimulus and you can do a response that was very, very inefficient. Well, fuck it, something came out. The more time that we have, the more we're going to tune up the response to that stimulus. And the more that the 5% stimulus, the more you become conditioned to that and your response starts to improve, we turn up the stimulus. The best analogy for this is, what are they, like the Tim's machines, right? Got a stiff neck, you put the pad on your neck. Who goes, oh, I got a stiff neck, let's put the pad on there, hook up the electrodes. Well, I'm going to turn it on. What do you want it on? Oh, put her on fucking 10, man. Fuck, your neck lights up. You're like, like I guarantee you're done, right? You start at 1. Can you feel it? Yeah, but it's good. Up, 2, 3. Ooh, there. Hold it there. Couple times, you do it a few times. Maybe it's just a few minutes. 3.5. Better, yes. You inoculate. It's the same thing. The stimulus has to be fed. You tune up the response. But the first thing is, from day one, I'm going to get the response I want out of you. I'm going to leave you no choice. I'm not going to have you thinking about it. I'm not worried about you fully understanding the whys and the hows. That shit is just cement. It bogs you down. It's weight you don't need to carry. This is why you go to somebody that actually has the experience, because they own the stimulus. They understand it. I didn't understand it. He did. I didn't have to figure it out. I had lived it. So every stimulus that he fed me was a stimulus that I experienced in my attempted murder. So I knew the fucker was right. I had zero question in whether he was on the mark or not. Where some people have never experienced it, so they do question. They go, I took karate for 7 years. I took boxing for 7 years. They never did this. I never felt this. Why wouldn't I just do this? Because it doesn't work. It doesn't work in the most extreme cases of violence. It doesn't work. Does it work in a fight? Like a street fight? Yeah, a lot of times it does. Because there's still some form of consent. You're moving around, sparring with each other. There's no ambush. There's no ruthless intent. There's no weapons. There's no blitzing. It's different. Brad, you were going to jump in with something.
Yeah, you know what? We've talked about stimulus and response, and we've kind of elaborated on the response by calling it a visceral response, right? And I think that it's one of those things that, where you think about what that visceral response is, and that's a response that's going to come out without any thought process, right? So if we have nothing merely but an intellectual exercise, and we're training to people's intellectual minds, but the challenge with that, and that's why we're saying visceral response, is because under combat stress, you're not in your intellectual mind. You're not in your forebrain. You know what I mean? So it's like, how can you access the proper response if that is not even on the table under combat stress? Because because of our physiology, right? So we can't eat. So it has to be to run the survival motor program. It has to be a visceral response. It cannot be an intellectual exercise because in the moment of, and I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but in the moment of violent critical assault, you don't have access to your intellectual mind the same way that we do having this discussion right now.
Yes. You know, that's a deeper part of this conversation, but I'm glad that you built a bridge to it because again, we can hit this from so many angles, but one of the big parts of the training, what Brad just shared with everybody, that is a real insight, is you have to take into account what Brad's saying, the physiology. How does my body react to violence? Because we have an innate survival system, and Brad's talking about the combat stress. And the second that our innate survival system, right, that part like this, the sympathetic nervous system, the part that is there and mobilizes to help us survive, what most people call the fight-flight mode, but that's your physiology. When that activates, motor function instantaneously starts to decrease. As threat and SNS activation increases, motor function decreases, and one of the byproducts of the change that's occurring in our body is loss of blood to the forebrain, meaning you can't think. So isn't it brilliant that on day one of the weaponizing process, there was an understanding to go, I'm going to bypass your brain. Why? Because A, you can't, you don't have time to think in combat, and B, your physiology may not even allow you to think.
Yeah, you're not bringing it with you anyway.
You're not bringing, yeah, exactly. And you know, so what we're going to do is just viscerally train your body. Like we're going to apply a stimulus. If I put the TIM pad on your leg and on a certain, muscle or tendon and gave it a little electricity, your leg will flick up, your calf will flex. Like, it's the same process. And the beautiful thing, and I don't want to gloss over this, the thing that is so powerful and great about this is there was zero expectation of quality in your response. The quality, the number one. So if we judge quality from 0 to 10, 0, like there is no response. Like, you stimulate the muscle and nothing happens. Well, we've got a big problem. Either that muscle's severed or dead or something's wrong. So just with the littlest bit of stimulus input, we get a 1. There's no quality in a 1, but the point is they go, yes, but the 1 is directly in line with how you survive. Stimulus of pressure and the body moved. And the body didn't move in a linear line. It didn't crumble straight backwards and Y out its base and turtle over. The 1, when the stimulus of forward pressure happened, you got off the X. They moved laterally. Was there a quality to it? No, but the quality was that you moved. If you can move, and I said it with me, that when I started moving, I didn't step off the grass. Why? Because there was a perceived boundary. Oh, we're here to train. I'm on his garage pad, his driveway pad. He's feeding me. Clearly, I need to stay inside of the dojo, the training space. Because otherwise that would be cheating. When in his mind, he's like, dude, there's bushes and cars and chairs. He was like, why don't you run over my car? You don't give a fuck about my car. If it's the difference in getting cut with this machete and saving your life, you better be climbing over my car. You better scoot under. You got to do whatever the fuck you got to do. The neighbor come out walking his dog, grab the dog and throw the dog at me. Like, I don't know, whatever you got to do. Your mission is to not get cut with this fucking thing. And the mission's going to become even more intense when we don't go faster. I just bring one other person in. Now there's 2 of us. And now there's 2 machetes. And that was amazing because I remember at the end of that first day, he went through, I think, 5 different stimulus. Right? The five different stimulus. And I remember at the end of it, I remember going, back to my hotel at night and thinking, that guy didn't teach me a fucking single technique. And yet, I just came back from 7.5 hours of feeling like I was, fighting for my life, quote unquote. You know what I mean? But I was moving and zoning and managing distance, giving space, taking space, fighting off of geometric angles. I was picking up expedient weapons. I was doing all these things where I'm like, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just doing things. I said, pick up the neighbor's eye. He was throwing stuff out. I said, there's a garbage can there. Why didn't you pick that up and use that as a barrier? Oh, there was a hat there. Why didn't you grab that? He made me one round. Remember, it's California plus 30 something degrees. He gave me a sweater. And he goes, why didn't you ever take the fucking sweater off? You just did a 3-minute round. You're sweating like a motherfucker. You're about to pass out. You never thought take the sweater off and fling this, like snap the sweater in my face or wrap your hands or your arms to protect yourself. And I remember being, well, I do now. Like next round, the sweater comes off. And then I remember the one time I went to pull the sweater off and it got fucking stuck on my head. And then there was a panic and I was tripping and falling. And if you tripped and fell, he did not stop. He would just yell, it's coming, it's get the fuck. And I remember you're rolling and shit. And then after he showed me a smarter way to take the shirt off. But at the end of the day, stimulus response the entire day, and he was fine-tuning things. He was teaching me to fight, like I said, with expedient weapons. He was teaching me with dos manos weapons and single-handed weapons, and he was teaching me flexible weapons, and he was teaching me geometric angles and using the environment as an ally. All of these things, and yet he didn't go into some long, intricate, complex, techno-fucking babble. He's like, down the road, as I do now, you're going to understand everything that we're doing. You'll have all the proper names and terminologies, and you'll understand the intricate mechanics and all the tactical things to do and stuff like that. But in his world, in the world of training elite operators, in the world of training people to survive violence, function first, form and knowledge second. And I have met very few people who understand how to implement and train that. That's not that, because why? That's not how you run a business either. You know, if you're in the business of martial arts instruction or self-defense instruction, this is not how you train people. You break it up, your curriculum, you name everything, you have levels, you divide into levels and belts, and you develop this nice, neat path, and they move from here, and they get stripes on their belt, and you do this, and you do that, and you have a big ceremony, and everybody claps and cheers, and you get a certificate, and you do all this stuff, and that's great for business. I'm not in the business of teaching martial arts. I'm not in the business of teaching self-defense. I'm in the fucking business of weaponizing people so they can fucking survive and thrive in one of the worst critical moments they'll ever face in their life. I'm in the business of functionalism, period. And so this is why I'm trying to share this with people, to say, this is how it was done for me. This is how I've done it for you guys. This is how you guys now help me do it for other people. Function first. One thing that has stuck with me, that I live by this, my business is built on this, is that every time you train somebody, you train them like it's the last fucking time you're ever going to see them. You train them like it's the last time you're ever going to see them, not because they quit, but because their life is in jeopardy, because some motherfucker tries to take them off this planet against their will. And so you've got to always be getting them operationally ready, because when they leave, you have no guarantees. No one knows what the future is going to be. And every time that they come back, and we are given the gift of more time to weaponize and train and prepare and elevate ourselves, our skills, our strategies, our tactics, it's the greatest gift. And that's a very different approach to training people that most people don't understand. So if anyone is out there, and there are people that are trying to training themselves or part of a gym or whatever it is, first you have to understand what the violent stimulus is. Like, what are the stimulus? Like, what does that feel like? And it's different, because the stimulus, this is, again, like, we're not fighters. I'm in no illusion about thinking I'm some sort of fighter, because the stimulus of a professional guy moving around and bobbing and weaving and snapping that jab out, and how he dumps the shoulder and faking it into some sort of hook or into some takedown, those are different fucking stimulus. And you have to be trained for those, and that is not my wheelhouse. That is not the stimulus that I know. That's not the stimulus that I've experienced in my life. That's not the stimulus that I know. That's not a stimulus that I can create and teach for other people. Even though I have had experience in the kickboxing, boxing, martial arts, that is so long ago, I don't know that. I'm shit at that. I don't know that anymore. But what I do know is violence. And that's the stimulus that I understand. And this is how we've been super successful, because I understand it. You guys have understand it, because it is all you know. It's the only stimulus you guys have ever been exposed to. I mean, Dustin, again, you have a black belt in a traditional martial art, but again, you probably couldn't feed that stimulus, because you're just like, That's not who I am anymore. I just have no, that's like, doesn't, it's like a long closed chapter of your life. But
Guy died.
Yeah, that guy died. That guy's dead. Yeah. But you could, when someone comes in without even talking, you could feed him the stimulus from a low level, a 1, and then dial that up and dial in his response to that and viscerally condition him bypassing that brain. Right. We used to do it, one of our, for Jesus, 10 years, more, maybe 15 years. We ran a 3-day combat school, and this was our premier program where people would come in Friday morning, start at 9 o'clock Friday morning, and they'd be done Sunday night at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and we would train them as long as we could get out of them, 8 hours, 9 hours, whatever we could do. And in that 3-day period, we taught them the entire weaponizing program. That was modeled after what they taught SEAL Team 6. And in those 3 days, we took them from no experience to operationally ready. And we were very clear why it was so successful, why we weaponized and how we weaponized so many people that came back to me over the years that had to use the strategies, tactics, and tools to defend themselves and their family in violent situations. And they did it successfully. They created what we call their John Wick moments. When they did this and how we did this, how the program is so successful, because most of them were fucking shocked. But we used the stimulus response. We viscerally trained them up to and including on the final day, the last 3-4 hours, we put them in live scenarios where they walked in and they went through 5 different scenarios. And these scenarios were no fucking joke. There was many a person who wouldn't even turn the doorknob to come into these things. But the ones that did, the ones that surrendered to the process and had that trust, got the stimulus response, until we created a neuro-associated trigger. And whenever a stimulus hit them, that trigger got pulled. And all of the safety protocols are built into it in terms of understanding the legalities of what you did, and you were able to articulate that part of it and understand it. But the stimulus would not. It's like having a trigger for a detonation device. The trigger has a certain amount of pounds of pressure. Somebody walking towards you, fuck you, wasn't enough to depress the trigger. We're talking about a blitz. Again, that's the difference between understanding how to feed the stimulus. When you understand how to feed the stimulus, we could go into a scenario with these guys and feed them be loud and aggressive and rude and inappropriate, and you could say all kinds of shit to these people. And there was an element of danger, but it wasn't enough to fire that trigger. But we would do that purposely because that was a shoot, no shoot. Scenarios were shoot, no shoot. Can you tactically remove yourself, or do you recognize the threshold of when you need to pull the trigger and go tactical? And that was all built into this process. And in 3 days, we were very, very successful at this. So much so, this is where we got a lot of the military guys and law enforcement guys because the reputation preceded us. I didn't have to market. Word of mouth was all the marketing we needed. Because the people that came to us were the people that had a real world problem, either because they work in a high risk environment, or they were people that had faced violence or had the real imminent threat of violence in their lives. That's who came to us. 3 days stimulus response. And then, of course, at the end of the 3 days, many of them became the core members like you guys. And they've been around for 20, 30 years, continuing the process. Stimulus response, refining the response, sharpening the response. Because guys like us, this is a lifestyle. We want to do it at a doctorate level. A lot of people come in and they just listen, get me through elementary school. Elementary school under, stimulus response saves my fucking life, allows me to protect my family. You're good. But then for some, it becomes a way of living. And they're like, no, I want the doctorate. I want to fucking educate myself. And and that's the difference in the levels. But every day and every time we train, it's about stimulus response. Even when we're developing attributes, there's the tools you live and die by, the self-preservation, then there's the self-perfection. How do we build better attributes? Stimulus response. What's the stimulus that demands this attribute respond and does it in a certain way with enough pressure that it demands that it grows? Most people, how do you train speed? How do you train reflexes? How do you train spatial awareness? How do you train body mechanics or weight transfer, whatever? It's not by mechanically and technically bogging yourself down and going through it step by step and dissecting. It's by understanding there's a stimulus that will develop the close quarter reflex. There's a stimulus that will develop a spatial awareness, that develops a sensitivity, that develops whatever reflex you might need, or a certain type of speed, alteration speed, initiation speed, whatever it is. And this is where I want to make people separate. Whatever it is you want to develop, fuck the technobabble. There is a direct, Paul used to always tell me, take the fucking express elevator. Everyone's climbing the stairs. Take the express elevator. But the reason this is hard for people to do or understand is because in order to train stimulus response, someone has to understand the stimulus. And that's what takes time. That's what takes years. And this is why you can't put a price tag on the experience. You know, it's so funny because I've been teaching for 20 something years, 27, 28 years. I mean, my instructors from the very first day were telling me that when you go home, start teaching people. Now, you're new to this. I'm not saying you charge people, but start teaching people. What we teach you, you pass on. And they were adamant about that. And so for the first 5, 6 years, I just taught friends, I taught family, I taught whoever I could get. I'd find a homeless guy on the streets. I'll buy you a fucking burger if you got 2 hours. And say, here's what you got to do to earn it. I'm going to pass this shit on to you. I had to beg people to be around me. Then I slowly started to create a business and I charged people, but I didn't give a shit about money. This was never about the money. And I recognized something. 12, almost 15 years in is when my instructors were finally like, now you're starting to get it. And it's like, what? Now you're starting to really be able to feed the stimulus. You understood it a while ago, but now your energy can feed it. Now you can become those different types of violent predators. You can embody that. Now the stimulus is pure. 15 years. And then in the last, I'm at 15 years in that. The next kind of 5 years, so I'm at 20 years before I really said it's time now to start doing this hardcore as a business. 20 years was about my own personal development. And yes, I was teaching some people through that, and we worked with law and all stuff, but this was not, and I made my living off it, but I wasn't hardcore into the business of it. Why? Because I needed 20 years. And this is what makes what we do valuable. Because if you haven't put in the 20 plus years, then you don't have the stimulus because you can't recreate it. You can't change the intent. You can't blitz at 5% so that the guy can succeed. But you can't blitz at 5% with full fucking 100% of intent where they can feel it, and that 5% is causing them to trip over themselves because they're like, what the fuck? Because you're adding the interpersonal human aggression. You're adding the intent. And people they've never felt it. Never felt what it's like when somebody is trying to murder you. They've never seen, the look in their eyes when someone's looking at you like you're fucking prey. They've never seen, the expression of fucking remorselessness. You know what I mean? Fucking hatred. They've never felt that. They've never seen that. And so how do they feed that? And yet, if you can't feed the stimulus, if the quality of the stimulus isn't there, then the quality of the response can never be higher than the quality of the stimulus. It's not possible. Right? You can't fix, you want to send the electrodes through the muscle to try to, relax the muscle, whatever. Well, if you can't get a quality stimulus in, you're not going to all of a sudden get a quality result. There's a direct correlation between that. And yeah, I was going to say too, it's so interesting because this actually is something that I would invest in a different podcast to talk about. But I'll preface it really quickly by saying that I've had the experience, unfortunately, of being in, an extremely violent situation that could have easily killed me, where each of you guys have not experienced that righteous, someone's going to try to murder you type situation, but I would argue that you absolutely have. And you know that you have. Because there is a term, like, people call a combat veteran, and then there's what's called a pre-combat veteran. And if your training is good, if the stimulus is right, you can receive the benefits. You become virtually identical to somebody who has learned through I've been in combat and now I'm a veteran. But when you went there, you're like, holy fuck, and you're lucky enough to survive, you're lucky enough to grow, to learn, to grow in that, and then you become inoculated against it. But in training, when the stimulus is right, this is why, when you have people that have been there and done it, and they're the ones teaching you, and you can feel it, taste it, smell it, touch it off them, and they bring that to the training, and they saturate you with that, you've experienced it. And maybe it's important. I know I'd like to do a different podcast on that, but can you guys talk to that feeling and experience that I'm alluding to?
Yeah, I'll do it on both ends actually, because obviously, on the receiving end of that, it's you have no doubts, there's no doubts in my mind that the energy wasn't real. Do you know what I mean? Because it's if I was to stand there and do nothing, I am going to get punched in the fucking head, or I am going to get cut with the machete, or I am going to get hit with the stick, whatever the stimulus happened to be, because even knowing that the threshold, it's the intent is there. And I think that's where the real word is, because it's you don't have to go fast, you don't have to go hard, but that intent of having somebody swing a stick, swing a machete, where they're move, don't move, you're going to get cut. It's fucking real. And it's so it demands that proper stimulus, and even being on the other side of that, where you get to feed that energy and you have to, give that gift to somebody else, it's funny because I remember doing that and I had somebody afterwards be like, hey man, are we okay? I just want to make sure that we're good, and it was almost thought that he did something wrong, or that
you were pissed at them.
Yeah. And I was no, we're good. Good job. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But it was because they're oh fuck, is this guy angry at me? Because that was the intent behind it, right? So, now it's the most important person is that training part, is that person that is able to give you the gift of that energy, because they're what's going to draw out that response.
Yeah. And I think it's important too to recognize that, again, it's like a swimming, it's a 1 to 10. It's the energy, the stimulus is real, the intent is real, but it's done in a manner where they can be successful.
Yes.
And then as they grow and get better, the stimulus has to get better, and that's where people, because they hear this thing, oh my God, at the you're feeding this guy, and this guy thinks you're actually trying to fight him. He thinks that you're actually trying to, you're assaulting him. And it's yeah, but did you notice how, I was coming at you, that shit was real, but you notice how you were succeeding? There has to be, we all fail. We all take our bumps and bruises in this. It's real shit. But it's done in the way where it stimulates the growth. It's like a wave catches you and drives you towards the beach. And again, a guy holding on to a surfboard, the wave throws him towards the beach. The goal is to get up and surf on that thing. And when you get up and surf on it, the wave, has a way of trying to throw you off that thing. But you're at the level where you can handle all that stuff. So there is progression to this whole thing. But at the end of the day, if that scares people, that from day one, there's the stimulus, and within the stimulus, the nucleus of any stimulus, forward pressure, whatever it is, the nucleus of any stimulus is interpersonal human aggression. Meaning, right from day one, you feel bad intentions directed towards you. And again, 5%. Then we go up, and then it goes up, And then it goes up. And it goes up according to how you can handle it. How long does somebody stay at 5%? As long as they need. As long as they need, until that stimulus, until that response hits the level we need. And then it goes up, then it goes up, then it goes up. And that's important because a lot of people, they want to learn to defend against violence and they don't want any interpersonal human aggression. It's triggering, it's this, it's that. And it's like, well, listen, this is the environment, this is an element that exists within it. And there's no value for me to train somebody for the first 3 to 5 years because they're new with no intent, allowing them time to develop the techniques and the strategies and the understanding. And then at year 5 go, well, brace yourself because now the shit gets real. Because you're back to zero. It's called what?
Negligence.
Exactly. It's called negligence. Okay. Anything else you guys want to throw in on this topic for tonight?
No, I don't think so. Like I know that we could go a lot deeper on it, because when you start talking about the energy and
well, we didn't even get into the violence reaction model and how this impacts the violence reaction model of perceive, analyze, evaluate, then takes out the formulate. And then you go to download. And that's a whole different thing that we can get into another day. But just for clarity, I want how Dustin, Brad, how we solved the problem of, again, being able to survive violence is by we stopped thinking about violence. And does that make sense? The training does not allow you to think about violence, quote unquote, in the beginning, because the brain will not serve you. As you get into it, again, this is something your body has to viscerally understand first, stimulus response, and then the brain catches up to it. And at the end of it, yes, the ultimate end goal is where the body and the brain are one. You understand it. You viscerally have that autopilot. It's the stimulus response. It's, all of this stuff just comes together. That's the ideal level we want to drive people to. But in the beginning, if somebody came to me, when they phone me and say, my wife's being stalked, my mother's got a guy at work, my son fucking takes the bus home from school and there's a group of guys that are fucking constantly harassing him. There's no time to intellectually teach him. There's no time to technically teach him. That's, like Brad said, that's the negligence. That's the lack of understanding. What you have to do is fucking condition them. Condition them so that even if their brain was like, hang on a second, I don't know what the fuck, their body is stimulus response. Their body is pulling the fucking trigger and doing what needs to be done so they come fucking home.
I think too, when you train that way, you don't have to 100% understand the why behind everything, intellectually, because again, like we talked about earlier, stimulus, response, reward. If the reward is there, if you see yourself not get cut, you see yourself not get hit, not get assaulted, whatever it is, whatever that stimulus it is, when you see it not come to fruition, you don't care as much about the intellectual knowledge as to why did that work, because you got the reward, like it worked. You're happy enough with that in the short term. Again, if you decide you want to go deep and spend your life getting the doctorate in this stuff, great. You're going to get the intellectual knowledge eventually. But as long as you get the reward, you'll be more than content with the response to that whatever stimulus.
Love it. Perfect. That's a great way. That's a great endpoint for this podcast. So I love that. Okay, so add this in. If anyone that's training, make sure you add it, learn the stimulus. Add it into your training. Make sure you're doing stimulus response training and make sure the stimulus is fucking real, because your response is never going to be better than the quality of your stimulus. And context determines the content. So make sure the context of the stimulus is appropriate. All right, everybody. Thank you, Dustin, Brad. Appreciate you guys. Thanks, everybody, for jumping on, checking this out, listening. Don't forget, subscribe, like, share. This is how we're reaching more people. Check out our website. There's lots of things. I'm going to drop it in here at the end. Visit us. Check us out. Don't forget, we have a 90-day intensive that you can jump in on and start the weaponizing process yourself. It's all done private, customized, anywhere in the world. It's remote. It's live. It's virtual. You can do it from the comfort and safety of your own home, and we can help you weaponize. So that is it, everybody. Until next time, please stay safe, stay weaponized. Chat again soon, everybody. Hey, thanks so much for listening. And listen, if you found this content valuable, here's 3 different ways that I can help you weaponize for free. First, grab a free copy of my ebook, The Education of a Weaponized Man. To get your free copy today, head to ebook.awakentheprotectar.ca. Number 2, you can take a free workshop where you will discover the 10 insights violent criminals don't want you to know. To take this workshop, head to workshop.awakentheprotectar.ca. The third way is to head to my website and check out all of my freeline programs that cover everything from mindset to strategies. To check us out, go to awakentheprotectar.ca. And finally, leave a 5-star review so that we can reach more good people like you who are ready to weaponize and rise regardless.